And then let's talk about, as we begin to close, our process for writing articles together. You want to talk
Oh,
about what we do whenever we write and just how we come up with new ideas?
yeah. I mean, so if you take the last 5 minutes of this, just discussing this story is probably something that would end up as an article. But basically, I think our process is genius. It's essentially the same way that we would test into launching a brand, but for writing.
Hmm.
And and essentially the way we do it. So you found this app Otter, which is it just basically records everything that it hears on your phone and it transcribes it into plain English. And so what we'll do is the last one was in Toronto, right? When we were
Yeah.
like eating a burrito. And we actually, the one before that's more fun, in San Francisco, when we had burritos and then we went to a diner because we were still hungry, and we just put one of our phones on the table and started recording this conversation. And basically, we recorded the conversation. The next morning, we looked back at it and we were like, "Wow, that was a smart conversation. This sounds like something really interesting here." And we took the basically the main points of what we talked about and turned it into, I think, one or two different threads on Twitter, and we blasted it out on Twitter basically as a way of, hey, is this something that's interesting to the audiences that we both have? And it was extremely interesting to a lot of the people that follow us. And so then we decided, let's take what we wrote about, and obviously using everything that you know and teach in rite of passage around, leveraging the second brain, but basically combining those two, the notes that we had, the insights from what people wanted to hear most about through the tweets, and also all the information that you had stored in your second brain. We created this article. Oh, and another really interesting thing that I learned from you was, before you even start writing the article, you want to figure out who that article is for. So it's not like we're putting an article out for a bunch of people. We picked one specific person, and at that time it was Kirsten Green, and said that's who we want to write this article for. And then we just started writing it, and when we put it out, it wasn't just an article of our thoughts. It was an article of our thoughts that were validated and past examples, because we had access to your second brain. And I think it did like 40 or 50,000 views in a week, just organically.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of principles there that I think are worth hitting on that I always talk about with my writing students. And, one of the first one was, yes, we pick one person to write for, but we always go for the smartest person that we can who's also interested in what we're saying. So we're not really writing for a friend. We're trying to write for the Kirsten Green, who's an investor in the direct to consumer space, and both of us really admire her. And so we said, if we can write an article that is insightful to her, then it will end up being insightful to a lot of other people too. And then what we do is, rather than sitting down to actually write, what we do is we just talk out the conversation before, and we just try to get a bunch of ideas transcribed. And then from there, we begin to narrow and distill and compress those ideas into an article. So we just have a lot of information that we bring into a little. And there's two examples that I really like with that. So, you know that it takes 50 gallons of sap to create 1 gallon of maple syrup?
Wow.
And so that's what we're doing. Our conversations are sap, and then the article is maple syrup. And the way that sap goes into maple syrup is basically through some kind of distillation process. And it's actually kind of like a diamond. The way that diamonds are created is they're ultra concentrated carbon. And what happens is they're created like 100 miles below the earth at temperatures of like 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Pressure exceeds 725,000 pounds per square inch. And then what happens is they're the carbon becomes super compressed, and what you end up with is a diamond, right? Like that super hard chemical, basically, not chemical, like element. And that's why we pay so much for diamonds, right? That's why they represent sort of eternity and all these sorts of things. And that's what we're doing with our writing. We're basically just taking a lot and compressing it into as few words as possible. And every article is just like one hangout session that we put into
Yeah.
2,000 words.
Yeah.